So here, talking about Subcut, new
Yeah,
plugin.
our
That's
new
good.
plugin. Yeah, yeah. So this plugin's been a long time coming, actually. Uh,
Yeah,
it's
we
amazing how
had this in
long
mind for a long time.
it's amazing how long plugins take to kind of really, really come to life when they're actually out, and
Yeah,
where they.
from the initial idea, yeah, developing and having it work properly. It's not like this.
Yeah, exactly. I think we did the first cut of Subcut before we did Beat Grader. I think we had something
Yes.
really
Yeah,
simple
we still
back
have
then.
some concepts we can show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely been through a lot of iterations. Do you want to explain where the original idea came from? It kind of came from the sub, really, didn't it?
Yeah, it just came from the sub because the sub is our first plugin and it's just made for solid sub bass quickly. And a way to use the sub is just by layering it to a more distinctive sound, which is your core bass. And
Mm,
maybe you want to have a really clean, deep, center focused sub bass, so you use the sub. And to make space on your original bass, you have to cut, and that's why we came up with, oh, why don't we just make an EQ that's targeting just the low end, so
yep,
we can use it in combination with the sub. That was the initial idea,
yeah,
and then we had so many steps. Oh, should we do it just by snapping the frequency to the key because it's useful? I mean, for a more musical approach to EQ. And then we adopted many iteration later this hybrid where you can go from using the key or the frequency with the dial on the actual subcut that we released.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So
So, and I suppose we looked as well, looking and going, well, we can just cut using any DAW or any EQ we're doing. So
yeah, whatever.
but we kept coming back to the idea of making it really specific to sub frequencies. And I know from producing, you just kind of feel sometimes that you got this big open spectrum in front of you up to
Yeah,
20,000 hertz, 20 kilohertz. And then you're like, okay, but I just want to do this thing down here. And it feels like it would be nice to be able to focus on that region of the spectrum and have tools that are a bit more tailored to that. And I suppose the sub was operating in that area. Now, the thing about the sub is people see the name the sub and they think it's a sine wave generator, but it's not,
it's
because
not.
because it actually has harmonics, because any sub we're talking about has harmonics because that's what gives it flavor and characters, right? So when we say sub, we mean we start from sub and then obviously it has harmonics and things above it. And it's the same thing with subcut, where we know that you're layering subs or it forms part of a much larger track,
Yeah,
but we still want to give you a tool where you can start thinking about it from that end and then kind of build on top of that. Or maybe, as you say, you've got something already and you want to take some of the bottom off to put something else in. And it just didn't really feel like there were tools that were catering
yeah,
for
made
that
for that
particular.
specific thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it just it also makes your production quicker. I don't want to say that, but I'd say that because
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I just want to remove low end. I don't need a full 8 band parametric EQ. I just need that,
yeah,
and it does the job really really good.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
also, I want to mention that the new way of seeing the spectrum with our rounded waveform thing we have around the dial, which is logarithmic. So it shows you from 26 hertz up to 220 hertz. That's the range of
I think it's
the frequency.
27.5, but yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
A0, so
It's
it
A0.
should be.
We're using
Yeah,
the ISO scale or whatever, but yes,
yeah,
A0
yeah. So
all the way up to.
with this thing, it's great because you can immediately see what's the fundamental, and you
Yeah.
can just use it manually to cut what's below the fundamental
Yeah.
because it's maybe some noise, some rumble,
Mm,
some thing you don't want to have in your mix because it's taking up some headroom. So that's a really different way to see how the frequency work. And you can, if you, for example, play a saw wave, you can clearly see the harmonics with this
yeah.
tiny little
Yeah, exactly.
waveform. It's really simple and easy to understand, easy to use, and that's a really good thing when producing fast and you want to throw down ideas quickly.
Yeah, kind of. I think we wanted to be musical based because
Yeah.
when you're playing keys here or whatever it is. I mean, I tend to think in terms of what key am I in, what note am I in. I mean, I like to approach it that way. I know other people are just like, that's my frequency, whatever. So that's why we've got the dual dial on there, so you can, or the dual readouts.
Yeah.
And also, people mightn't realize you can click on those and drag each of them. So if you drag the note, it'll quantize to the note up and down. And then if you click and drag the frequency, you can move finer up and down in frequency. Also, then if you're slightly off and you double click on the note, it'll quantize to the nearest note.
Yeah, that's great.
And some stuff like that. Yeah, the dial is interesting. What I find really interesting about like sub bass or focusing on one area of production really well is that when you have to cater for everything all the time, so when you have to cater for big wide EQs or a synth that covers every type of sound, you have to pile in lots of options and you have to focus really wide, which sometimes mean you can't be as specific as you would like to be. And that dial would be really hard to do, like the frequency dial would be really hard to do on a plugin that extends. This thing only goes up to 220 hertz, right? So there's a lot of space, even on a logarithmic scale, still from 220 hertz to 20,000 hertz. So you wouldn't really show that kind of level of detail on notes at higher frequencies. But actually, the sub area really lends itself to kind of drilling into that and looking at that in detail. So yeah, it's quite fun to see those harmonics light up. I mean, that's these are little things that we did and we were just going along. Whereby at first it didn't have that on there, and then
at first was like,
and then we're like, but I want to see the note. I want to. And then the next thing was we were playing with it. We're going, well, I want to, like, sometimes I'm cutting something here and then I want to be able to hear. I want a bit more of a reference because often there's a lot going on in a mix, even if just solo the part. Yeah. So then we put this little click thing in. So when you click on that note area, it plays a pure sine wave at that frequency. So let's just say there's a problematic note and it's clicking or thumping or something, and you can solo it and then move subcut up and down or out of the way and then press on that particular frequency and then just on and off here. Oh, is that what I think it is? So little things like that we kind of felt you wouldn't necessarily do in a full EQ and all the bells and whistles and Q controls and all these different things. But in
tons of them.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we really enjoyed just kind of focusing in on that area and what can you do in that particular area. Then there's the roll-off modes. We spent a lot of time on this. It's kind of...
it looks simple on the outside. It's like iceberg, right? So you just see the top that's coming out, but underneath there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with the filters. I think, well, from the design perspective of finding the right type of filter, like what we designed... Yes. Having a flat response in the pass band, so the bit you're keeping, not the bit you're going away, making sure that's okay. But then actually we spent on how many times we go through the iteration of choosing the kind of the sound of the roll off to feel right. So the approach you do here, so there are mathematical engineering approaches and we can do those, right? But then we said, hold on, this is a music, we want this with the notes and everything, we want this to be a musical plugin. So what we did was basically design a style of filter that we felt would work well with this and trialed it on loads of different things. But then we literally tuned it musically. So all the parameters and all the settings internally on the filter to get it working right are chosen basically on loads of source material that we went through. And then, how does a bass guitar sound? How does a synth sound? All these different things. Whatever. And how do they cut and roll off? So we hope there's a degree of judgment in there that feels musical and nice to other people.
The three roll-offs can be like used and can be the ones that you need, because the steepest one is like really, really steep. Then there's the gentle one, which is really gentle, of course. And to be honest, I'm using quite a lot the middle one. It's more of a general purpose thing.
Yeah.
and it's just sound good.
Yeah.
And if you want to, I mean, cut too much,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't resonate a lot, even with the steepest one.
I like the steepest one. I'm a steep cutter. I want that out of there, and that's the thing. You can do things with filters whereby you can do super steep. I think elliptical filters, different types of filters. You can do really, really, really steep stuff, but there's always a cost to pay in some kind of resonance or ringing or some kind of artifact that you introduce in that. I like to think that we kind of got that steep.
That was a compromise.
Musical steep is how I like to think about it. So I think, and then there's the solo controls. So you obviously can hear it the other way around.
Oh yeah, that's really useful. I always use that because I mean it shows you what you're cutting out. It's a simple feature, but makes a huge difference. So, well, for example, you can reference when you're cutting out lows from a bass sound, and you use the solo. You can hear what you're cutting, and then you maybe use the sub or whatever other synth to make a more solid sub bass with maybe a simple sign.
Yeah,
and you can switch A, B to listen. I mean, the before and after. And you can clearly hear the difference, and you can boost it a bit. You can shape better the sound to match it. And I mean, even frequency-wise, it's a really handy tool.
Yeah,
and I use it a lot.
We'll talk about auto in a second. But do you know my favorite feature I enjoyed putting in on this was so many filters. Like you put it in and it's off, but it's still got a sound to it, you know?
Oh, yes.
I hate that. Because you got to go, especially you want to do some automation or something where this is maybe not so good, but there's other plugins and you kind of go automation and you want to start from zero and just put it on a track somewhere. And then you go to bring it up and you realize later that it was just kind of destroying the high end or something when it was on zero. So...
you always have to disable the plugin where you're not using it for automation.
Yeah, so because of that pet hate, if you dial subcut to zero, it's pure, like it's taking the bits of audio data that came in, passing them straight through. It's not like doing anything. So just so you know that, but it's kind of subtle, but it does do that. There's the auto mode, of course, which we put in a bit later after showing it to a few people, and so we were reusing it, and it just felt like a natural progression.
That's a really key feature.
Yeah,
I mean, working musically on a filter, you start thinking, oh, okay, what's another thing we can add? So when you're cutting a sound, you just and you want to remove the low end. You just dial in with the cutoff and that's my point. But what if then you play another note after that one? So for example, you're in C, you play C, so you're cutting what's below that, the C, then you move to F. And now the filter is just cutting from C to zero, but you're still having that range of frequencies that goes from C to F, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With auto mode, you just it just follows the lowest higher note, so the lowest in frequency and higher in dB note, pitch that's detecting, and it automatically follows that. So in order to, we can say, maximize the effect of frequency reduction of low end remove. So that's really an amazing.
I spent a lot of time on that bit
music.
too. To make it feel right and to make again matching with different types of source materials to see how it works. So in the menu, there's some 3 modes where you can change effectively the attack, how quickly it moves and follows the note. I don't know how much we can do about technically, but I suppose you've got different elements of analysis of the signal going on. Obviously, we're displaying the waveform of the signal, but actually we use a completely different algorithm to do pitch detection, which is again tuned to just that frequency range. So the idea there is that we do a bunch of stuff internally that kind of really zones in that range, so we can be as accurate as we can. Now, everyone knows pitch detection.
Higher frequency. We're working at higher frequency. It's easier. right?
Yeah. Well, the weird thing about sub frequencies, I don't want to go into it now because I'll be here all day going on
Yeah,
about this. But
yeah.
like when they're really low frequency, it takes an awful lot of samples to be sampled in order to actually even have one cycle of the lowest frequency sine wave. So basically, that actually means you need to accumulate more time in a plugin to make a decision based on sub frequencies than you do in others. And I think that's why maybe a lot of people avoid getting into that. It's kind of, it gets a little bit complicated. Higher frequencies for certain tasks are actually just easier to deal with. So there's a certain you can't get around the physics of it because but in many cases, this makes sense to people. In many cases, when you choose a buffer size in your DAW and you expect a certain type of latency, so that's just, I can't remember, 2 to 56 samples at 48 kilohertz is, what is that? 5 minutes, I can't remember, 7, 8 milliseconds or whatever it is. But actually, like along a really low sub frequency sine wave is actually more samples than that. It takes quite a lot of milliseconds to actually produce a full sine wave. So if you want to make decisions based on where to cut and stuff, when the frequencies are low, you got to do some things basically, and be as clever as you can about getting it right basically. So we've done as much as that as we can without butting up against the laws of physics, basically, to try and make that useful. But yeah, I think the thing about subcut to note as well is that sometimes when you in your normal EQ and you go to do a cutoff, I always feel as both an engineer but then a musician that a lot of the EQs feel like they're built with an engineering hat on, where you kind of go and, well, I've told the filter algorithm internally to tune to an F or something, but actually, and that frequency is this. In reality, I know from filter design, depending on the type of filter, the roll off might start anywhere around that range of that
like
note.
Yeah.
So you stick it on F, and then actually the roll off might start like few semitones up, few semitones down. So, and that's why I think when sometimes people say certain EQs sound musical or that they work for them, I think it's because it's affecting the music in the way that they didn't quite expect. So we really had that in our mind with subcuts. So if you choose a frequency, if you choose a note, and then you say that what you're saying is that is the lowest note I want to keep basically, and I want to get rid of everything below that, right? And what we've done is we've tuned it to make sure that note is completely intact and that doesn't get, attenuated or affected or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, when there's a roll off, that means that it will either gradually roll off or whatever. But we still try to maintain that fundamental frequency you've chosen. And then in auto mode, what it does is it goes further up. It kind of uses that as a basis and then goes up a number of semitones and then cuts away more. Such
kind
that
of
you can
an octave.
kind of octave. So it's basically trying to find the fundamental of the note you're doing because you're going to replace that with something else. That's the reasoning
that's the
of
point.
it. So really you would put auto on when you really want to make room because you're going to put something else in. And then if you're looking for that real accuracy, like I was just talking about there, on a particular note where you want to do something, then obviously just be a manual mode.
I've also seen some other uses of the auto mode. I have friends that make they're beat makers, and they usually use samples to stack on top of the 808 and the drums. So for example, if you have a piano loop, you can just drop a subcut with auto, and it just removes what you don't need and that's clashing with your 808. So it just follows the fundamental of the piano, for example, or guitar or synth, and it just gets rid of that automatically, which is good.
Yeah, it's a funny area, the sub area of the spectrum, because it's the only area that you're probably going to get most confused about what you're hearing in the studio, right? So, and I'm sitting here. I've got a really old pair of Mackie HR 824s here, which loads of drum and bass producers use for a long time, and they're getting old, but they're still working really well. So like I know them so well.
They're aging.
Right?
They're not getting old. They're aging.
Yeah, but I've had them in lots of different studios, and I've seen and heard different things come out of them at different sub sub frequencies basically that we would typically, and you start to realize, hold on a sec, if you actually look at what a sub frequency is, it's moving the the cone of your loudspeaker in and out. And actually sometimes what you think you're hearing as sub is actually just that movement hitting against random things in your studio, and in the case of your speaker, and all these different types of things. And what you start to realize as well as a DJ, and when you made your own track and maybe you haven't been aware of all this, is that you go in, you hit play the first time in a club, and next thing you just, oh my God, I had no idea there was that much low end crap in there. So I think we also thought that this tool kind of helps with that overall problem as well, because you can also use it as I'm not sure, so I'll just put on auto here to remove something away, especially from slightly higher parts, because that's what can happen sometimes. Like you've sampled something or taken something, you don't even realize there's as much, or you're not tuned into it, that there's that much low end in there. So you can, use it on that type of stuff too. Okay, so that's a bit of an overview of Subcut. If you want to check it out, you can do a 14-day trial. It's fully functional.
Yes.
And that's it. We look forward to see how you get to use it in your tracks.
Yeah. Keep in touch.